most innovative Pro lineup yet.
Fastest chip ever.
Most powerful Pro camera system ever.
The most advanced display ever.
We're calling it the Dynamic Island.
We call it Photonic Engine.
So all of that's great, but how much of that really matters to you every day you use your phone? So let's start with the shiny new A16 Bionic processor.
iPhone 14 Pro is powered by our new A16 Bionic chip.
On stage, Apple compared it not to the A15, not even the A14, but 2 generations old A13. But you'll notice improvements in photos and videos, albeit slight improvements. Now, why do I say slight? Okay, so they launched the new 48 megapixel sensor, right?
A 48 megapixel camera with a quad pixel sensor.
Now, between the 12 megapixel and the 48 megapixel, there's really not a whole lot of difference. So here are raw shots taken using the 12 megapixel mode and in the 48 megapixel mode and treated exactly the same way. Can you tell the difference? And this is how they looked when they were not treated. Any difference right now? Okay, let's go back and now let's zoom in. And if you see, you just get a tiny bit more detail in the 48 megapixel photo. It's not 4 times the detail, but it is 3 times the size. And so tell me honestly, how often are you going to zoom in at that level or crop in to make another photo? Unless you're a pro iPhone photographer, I would say never. And so that 48 megapixel doesn't really mean anything to an average user like you and me. But they did talk about Photonics engine and that they've improved the low light photography to some extent, and we'll talk about that a little later in the video, so hang tight. Now, next, they talked about Action Cam.
iPhone 14 Pro now includes new action mode.
And you'll never use it. Because you know, the regular 4K video that you shoot using the primary lens is already very stable. And what Action Cam does is that it makes it stable, undoubtedly, but it cuts the resolution to 2.8K and it uses the ultra-wide camera to shoot that video, which is not great, optically speaking. And because it's ultra-wide, its performance when it's mid to low light conditions is pretty bad. I mean, just stick with your primary lens camera for 4K videos and it's already very stable with the 2nd gen sensor shift OIS in the iPhone 14 Pro. And seriously, if you're someone who regularly shoots that kind of stuff which requires extreme stability, you probably have something like the GoPro, right? You weren't waiting for Apple to release Action Cam on the iPhone, were you? Okay, next, you can now shoot cinematic videos in 4K.
And cinematic mode gets a great update, now supporting up to 4K resolution and 30 frames per second for even more detail.
So up until last year, cinematic mode was a joke because it'll only let you shoot at 1080p and singularly at 30 FPS. Now you can shoot in 4K, so it's definitely more usable and it will let you shoot at an additional 24 FPS. So it's definitely closer to cinematic. But it's still a joke because the white balance keeps shifting depending upon lighting conditions, and there's no way for you to fixate the white balance at a custom level. And there's nothing cinematic about that. So unless Apple really brings custom white balance to cinematic mode, it's not truly cinematic. And now, how could we not talk about Dynamic Island?
iPhone 14 Pro introduces a new front design that is sure to become iconic.
We're calling it the Dynamic Island.
So Dynamic Island is Apple's way of giving an ugly part of the phone some purpose. See, it displays system functions like charging, AirDrop transfers, ring and silent toggle, animation for Face ID, phone call, but none of these are actually useful. They aesthetically look really cool. But you know the fun of watching these things? It wears off really quickly. Now, sure, one can argue that it makes accessing time-critical apps slightly easier. So if you've got a timer running, you can quickly get a sense of the progress, or you're driving, you can quickly get back into maps. But timers are actually more distracting in the Dynamic Island, especially if you're on a countdown. And for maps, picture-in-picture is the right way to do it, just the way Android does. And God knows when would that ever come to Apple iPhones. And yeah, things like music playback is integrated with the album art and a visualizer, and you can long press to pause and change tracks. And honestly, I'm never listening to music with the phone screen looking at my face, right? If I'm listening to music, it's probably while I'm doing something and the screen is locked, and it's a lot easier to access the music widget on the lock screen than it is to, unlock the screen, go to your pill, long press it, and then access it that way. I'm telling you guys, Dynamic Island, it's all about the fun of using it initially, and it wears off really quickly. It doesn't add to any usefulness, at least not right now. And next is crash detection.
And a feature we hope you never have to use. Crash detection.
And sure, it's a great safety feature, but I don't think it's a reason to get a phone. I mean, I don't see myself going to a store and saying that, hey, this phone does not have crash detection, so I'm gonna go for the iPhone 14 Pro. I don't know. I mean, it just doesn't build up as a very great use case that I would use as a decision to get the iPhone 14 Pro. So yeah, all of these features that Apple talked about for the iPhone 14 Pro, after having used it for a couple of months, I realized there's no real impact. So don't get sucked into, the things that you see on their website, on their video ads, on the launch event. Like, don't fall for it. But sure, after having said all of that, there still are some reasons, decent reasons, why you can consider the iPhone 14 Pro. First, it's got better low light photos and videos. So with the new Photonics engine, iPhone 14 Pro lets you take slightly better photos and videos in mid to low light conditions. So it will have lesser noise, better colors, and more clarity. But it's definitely not 2x as Apple claims on its website. It's marginally better and noticeable only if you get involved at pixel level. Second, they also talked about how the iPhone 14 Pro now has a peak brightness of 2000 nits, which is great for outdoor use, but it's only for short, continuous use. So if you're outdoors and it's very hot, it's only going to last for about 5 minutes, and then it's going to drop back to 1000 nits. And secondly, the regular brightness of 1000 nits is the same as the iPhone 13 Pro. Third, the front camera now has autofocus. Wow. Step in the right direction, Apple. I think better late than never. But you can see how I'm forced to say that this is an upgrade on the iPhone 14 Pro that you won't see in the earlier model. So it's a pro feature in the iPhone 14 series. Autofocus. Next is always on display. And I agree that the convenience of just glancing over the screen to look at the time or the fact that you have notifications is important. It's time saving for sure, but it could also be distracting. But I would think that having always on display and then the option to turn it off is better than not having always on display at all. And so if you care about this, you've got one very good reason to get the iPhone 14 Pro or the Pro Max. And lastly, in general, you will get better speeds on LTE as well as 5G. And also, since this phone has Bluetooth 5.3, so when you use it with accessories that are also using Bluetooth 5.3, you can experience faster connections, faster switching, faster pairing. So if you care about that kind of stuff, this is important. Alright, so there you go. Those were 5 semi-decent reasons as to why you can still consider getting the iPhone 14 Pro. But all the hyped up stuff they talked about at the launch, on their ads, on their website, from a usage standpoint, they're not good enough. And so Apple, they really need to step up their game for the iPhone 15 series. Alright, thanks for watching guys. If you have any questions, make sure you put them in the comment section below. And as always, if this was helpful, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit that bell notification icon and mark all. Really helps the channel grow. I'll see you guys in the next one.